There is a kind of danger that doesn't come from anger or violence. It comes from silence, from someone who used to always smile but now grows quiet, from a heart that once opened unconditionally, now quietly closing. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." For those with an empathic heart, the empaths, life isn't just a series of days to live, but a series of emotions to feel. They don't just show up, they absorb, they sense, they carry. But in a world that craves gentleness, yet exploits it, these souls often become the unseen bearers of others' burdens. And when that person, the one you once believed would always be there, always understand, always be kind, suddenly steps out of that role, they become the most dangerous kind of person. Not because they want to hurt anyone, but because they no longer allow themselves to be hurt. A childhood memory, when the child first learned silence as a way to be loved. I still remember that summer I was around 8 years old. Every time there was a loud sound in the kitchen, I held my breath. My parents argued a lot, and I, too sensitive to ignore, too young to interfere, would bury myself under the covers, imagining myself disappearing. I learned something very early on. If I'm good enough, quiet enough, understanding enough, maybe things won't get worse. And so I became an empath, not because I chose to, but because I thought it was the only way to be loved, to keep the world from falling apart. From that point on, I smiled to hide my exhaustion. I listened to maintain peace. I apologized, even when it wasn't my fault. What about you? Have you ever stayed silent to hold on to a love that was hurting you? And then one day the shadow rises. Jung called it the return of the repressed. It's not rebellion, it's the end of self-betrayal. When an empath no longer replies right away, when they're no longer always available, when they say, "I'm not ready for this conversation," when they stop rescuing others and start saving themselves. It isn't coldness, it's resurrection. It isn't selfishness, it's self-worth. It isn't the end of love, it's the beginning of conscious love. Why does the world misunderstand empaths? In the next part, we'll dive deeper into the greatest misunderstanding the world projects onto the deeply feeling ones. That sensitivity is weakness, that listening is a duty, that kindness is something to be drained until there's nothing left. And then we'll realize what's truly dangerous is not an angry empath, but an empath who has stopped tolerating. Have you ever reached that moment when your silence no longer felt like compassion, but the result of having endured too long? Leave a comment below. Because this journey from someone who always gives to someone who dares to choose themselves is a journey worth telling with reverence and truth. The misunderstood nature of sensitivity, when empaths are exploited in the name of kindness. Carl Jung once said, "We wear the mask called the persona to live in society, but the shadow we reject is the very part of the soul demanding to be seen." And for empaths, that mask often looks like, "I'm always okay, call me anytime," or "It's fine, I understand." When kindness gets distorted into obligation. Modern society glorifies strength, independence, and emotional control. As a result, those who live with natural sensitivity are often labeled too weak, fragile, or worse, emotionally unstable. But the problem was never sensitivity. The problem lies in how empaths are forced to act strong in a world that doesn't know how to embrace vulnerability. Think about an office where everyone's trained to be professional, and yet it's always the most approachable girl who ends up listening to everyone's personal problems from bosses to coworkers. She's also the one asked to cover weekend shifts because she's the sweetest in the team. Or think of a family where the oldest sister is the peacemaker after every parental argument, constantly suppressing her own emotions to keep the peace and set an example for her siblings. In these settings, empaths are not allowed to be angry, tired, or say no. And if they do, they're suddenly labeled as different, difficult, or selfish. Depth psychology. The cost of denying the shadow. Jung called this the psychic split, a fragmentation of the soul. When the part of us that knows how to say no and how to protect ourselves is buried beneath the role of being the nice one, the shadow begins to grow. That shadow might show up as unexplained depression, emotional exhaustion after social interactions, or even physical pain with no clear cause. It's the soul whispering, "Enough, it's time to live as my true self." When empaths are exploited for too long, they don't explode. They retreat mentally, emotionally until they disappear from their old roles entirely. Sensitivity misunderstood, a cultural deception. In America, what I call my second home, I've met many people like this. Mothers, wives, managers who still feel not good enough if they're not making everyone around them happy. Men taught that real men don't cry, who hide in their cars at night crying like children from the emptiness inside. We live in a culture that has twisted the truth. Sensitivity is mistaken for weakness. Listening is mistaken for a lack of opinion. Empathy is distorted into always being available. But the truth is, empaths are not weak. They've just gotten used to being hurt without speaking up. When an empath awakens, that's when the real threat begins. The danger isn't rebellion, it's intentional silence. It's the moment the empath stops picking up the phone to absorb emotional dumping. It's when they say, I can't carry your emotions anymore, I'm learning to face my own. Someone who was always there now becomes unpredictable. Someone who always listened now begins to guard their presence. And that scares people because they were used to exploiting the empath's kindness like it was free and infinite. If you're watching this and feel like, I'm exhausted and no one notices, I give so much love and receive nothing back. I've been silent for so long I forgot the sound of my own voice. Then know this, you're not alone. There are thousands of empaths out there also learning to return to themselves, not to become cold, but to love with awareness and boundaries. Leave a comment below. I am learning to choose myself. You'll see this community is here to listen, to understand, and to walk with you. In the next section, we'll go deeper into Jung's concept of the shadow, not as something evil to destroy, but as the forgotten part of ourselves buried in order to be loved. We'll explore. Why is self-protection often mistaken as selfishness? Why is saying no the first step for empaths on the path to healing? And more importantly, you'll see, when an empath dares to love themselves first, they don't become selfish. They become divinely dangerous because they can no longer be manipulated through guilt and obligation. Have you ever felt like your kindness was treated like a duty? Have you ever smiled while screaming inside? Share your thoughts, because your voice might just open the path for another empath to finally live their truth. Are you ready to enter the next chapter? The shadow and the rise of self-worth. Shadow when the darkness rises to protect the soul. Carl Jung once said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. We do not become awakened by fantasizing about light. True growth only happens when we dare to face the darkness, the very parts of ourselves we've once rejected. For those who live with empathetic hearts, the shadow isn't the evil or dark part. Their shadow is the right to say no, to be angry, to protect themselves without guilt. And the awakening journey of an empath begins the moment they no longer fear their own shadow. The shadow is not bad. It is the part you buried to be loved. Picture a child always gentle, always obedient. Every time this child got upset or angry, the adults would say, you're too sensitive. Stop crying. Don't make mommy sad. Don't be selfish. Think of your little sibling. So the child learned to bury their true feelings just to be accepted. They learned to wear a mask, the eternal mother archetype, the one who is always kind, nurturing, and never needs anything for herself. But every archetype has a shadow. The eternal mother, when she no longer loves herself, becomes the martyr, the one who self-sacrifices until she's drained, then resents others for it. Or the wounded healer, the one who heals everyone, except herself. Her shadow is silent despair, exhaustion behind a smile. Empaths were not born to be martyrs. They were born to embrace their shadow and live whole, undivided lives. Signs your shadow has been suppressed too long. Do you recognize yourself in these? You feel angry, but immediately feel guilty for being angry. You say no to something, but then obsess over feeling like a bad person. You say, I'm tired, then try to hide it so no one notices. This is when the shadow is asking to be heard, but instead of listening, you silence it with kindness. You call burnout compassion. You call pain growth. You call silence maturity. Jung called this the tension of the opposites, the internal pull between what is accepted persona and what is denied shadow. If prolonged, it causes a split in the psyche, leaving the soul half alive. When the shadow rises, you're not becoming worse. You're becoming real. A friend of mine, Lena, was once the person who's always there for everyone. She was the little son in her family, her friend group, her workplace. Until one day, Lena stopped replying to messages at midnight. She stopped smiling through other people's conflicts. Instead of giving advice, she started asking, do you really want to change or just want someone to listen so you feel better? People said she'd changed, that she was cold or selfish. But Jung would say, no, she's returning to her essence. When you accept your shadow, you are no longer manipulated by guilt. You start knowing who you are and who you are not. If you're in that stage where your shadow is rising, know this. You are not alone. Leave a comment below. I'm learning to live authentically without fearing my own shadow. You'll see others are on the same journey too. We no longer have to hide our emotions just to be loved. We are learning to love ourselves even when we are not perfect. As you enter this stage where light and dark coexist within something miraculous happens, Jung called it the transcendent function, the higher function of the soul where a new human is born, no longer fragmented, no longer ashamed, no longer living to please. In the next part, we'll explore how to reconcile the one who always gives with the one who's learning to keep something for herself. Practical steps to start living as an integrated empath, one who still loves deeply but no longer abandons herself to be loved. Remember, your shadow didn't come to destroy you. It came to return the missing parts of your soul. And if you've ever felt tired of always being the good one, know this: you're stepping into the most important transformation of your life, the one where you finally return to yourself. When an empath becomes the master of their own being. Carl Jung once wrote, "Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries." True wholeness doesn't come from rejecting parts of ourselves, but by reconciling the opposing forces within. And this is the highest phase of awakening for an empath, when they are no longer victims of emotion, but become the navigators of their emotional world. When they no longer merely react, but consciously choose. When they are no longer manipulated by guilt, but live with inner clarity. From breakdown to rebirth. The journey of Marcus. Marcus was a 38-year-old design manager described by everyone as easygoing, considerate, and exceptional listener. But no one knew that after work, Marcus would sit in his car for hours, no music, no engine running, just sitting there in the dark, feeling invisible in his own life. He couldn't recall the last time he allowed himself to say, "I'm tired." All he remembered was being the fixer in every meeting, the shoulder in every relationship, even as his own heart wore thin. Marcus didn't have a mental health issue. He simply never gave himself permission to choose himself. The integrated empath. Mastery is not denial, but conscious ownership. Jung called this the transcendent function. When you integrate both light and shadow, gentleness and boundaries, giving and knowing when to stop, you become someone entirely new. Marcus began this journey the day he stopped being available to everyone and started listening to himself. At first, it felt terrifying. He feared he was losing himself, but gradually he realized the old Marcus was just a well-rehearsed role, the kind man who kept giving even when his soul was empty. When he started saying no to invitations, unreasonable requests, and energy-draining conversations, no one died. Nothing collapsed. And most importantly, he no longer resented himself at the end of each day. Signs you're becoming an integrated empath. You still feel others, but you no longer dissolve into them. You become selective about your energetic environment. You no longer just put up with it. You don't reply immediately, not from apathy, but from a place of honoring inner peace. You no longer try to save everyone unless they're genuinely seeking to save themselves. You don't lose your kindness, you refine it. You don't abandon love, you return love to where it truly belongs. From archetypal roles to a liberated soul, an empath before integration might embody the eternal mother nurturing to the point of depletion, the wounded healer, healing others as a duty, the nice guy archetype, so good that he forgets who he is. But through shadow work and deep inner reckoning, they evolve into the warrior of the heart, loving with boundaries. The mystic empath, attuned to emotion, but not drowned by it. The embodied self, living truthfully, no longer needing external validation to feel real. Are you learning to love without losing yourself? Are you shifting from giving to all toward conscious and intentional giving? Leave a comment below. I am living truthfully with my empathy. Let that sentence be the beginning of a new community where empaths no longer have to feel alone or wear masks just to be loved. In the next part, we arrive at the final chapter of the journey. The return, not to the world, but to the original essence of the empath. Together, we will explore what happens when an empath no longer needs recognition to feel worthy. How can one remain pure-hearted in a chaotic world? And you will come to see it's not that the world is too harsh for the sensitive, but rather that the integrated and free empath becomes the guiding light for a world that's forgotten its humanity. The return when the empath stops seeking outside themselves. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And for the empath, after going through disintegration, confronting the shadow, learning to set boundaries and integrating the opposites, They begin to enter the fourth stage, the return to the self. But this is not a return in the usual sense. It is a return to the soul that has always been present, but was once neglected in order to make others comfortable. It is the return of someone who has walked through the depths, not a victim of emotion anymore, but the conscious creator of their inner reality. Transcendent function. When ego and the unconscious resonate, Jung called this the transcendent function. It is the self-regulating process of the psyche where two opposing forces, e.g., the desire to be loved versus the need to protect oneself, no longer clash, but coexist within the same psychic space. Not either this or that, but rather, I can love deeply and have clear boundaries. I am still sensitive, but I no longer dissolve into others' emotions. I can give, but I do not lose myself. This process doesn't happen overnight. It is the fruit of many deep nights where the soul must die in order to be reborn. Jung in the Red Book, a living symbol of the return, in 1913 after his break with Freud in a period of deep disorientation, Jung fell into a profound spiritual crisis. He wrote in the Red Book, I had to let myself plummet into the depths. I had to live and experience the unconscious. He began to document dreams, images, and inner dialogues. He painted not for art's sake, but to preserve the spiritual map of his soul. Archetypal figures emerged: the wise old man, the boy, the priest, the madman, all aspects of his psyche returning, demanding recognition. And in the end, Jung did not escape the shadow. He invited it to sit beside him as a companion. From then on, Jung no longer lived in conflict. He lived as someone who had come home. The return of the empath is not the same as when they left. They return but no longer submit to others' emotions. They return but no longer smile while breaking inside. They return not to please anyone but to live in alignment with a heart refined by truth. The awakened empath does not become rigid. They become gentler yet stronger. They think less about, am I doing the right thing? And live more with the feeling, this is true to my soul. Signs of the return: a new life blossoms from within. You no longer feel you have to do something to be worthy. You are enough just by being. You no longer seek validation in others' eyes. You see yourself clearly, and that is enough. You no longer contort yourself to avoid being a burden. You know that authentic existence is never a burden. The return happens when you begin listening to yourself the way you once listened to others. If you are in this phase feeling lighter yet unfamiliar, unsure who you are without always being the helper, leave a comment. I am returning to myself and I am not alone. This community is here to witness you, not just when you're kind, but when you're real. In the final part of this video, we'll explore a vital question. After the return, how does an empath live, no longer driven by fear nor by the needs of others? How can an empath be visible in modern life without hiding who they are? How can they live in society without losing their softness? How can empathy become a resource, not a burden? Carl Jung once said, your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. Reclaiming your choice when an empath redefines their relational ecosystem. Carl Jung once said, loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. Loneliness doesn't stem from the absence of people, it stems from being unable to share what truly matters to you. After an empath awakens, no longer submitting, no longer playing the savior, their relationships begin to shift. And this is one of the most painful yet necessary stages in the journey back to self. Old relationships begin to break, and not because you did anything wrong. When you begin to set boundaries, say no, and refuse to carry the emotional weight for others, some people will feel betrayed. Not because you hurt them, but because you're no longer a vessel for their projected darkness. The person who used to call you every time they needed to vent might now say you're distant. The one who praised you for being understanding may now say you're harder to be around. Those who expected you to constantly sacrifice might pull away when you start loving yourself. Jung called this the rejection of the collective shadow. When you step out of a role, those who benefited from your self-sacrifice react defensively. But from here, real relationships begin to bloom. When you become authentic, you stop attracting codependent relationships. Instead, you begin to resonate with emotionally mature individuals, people who don't need saving but desire true companionship. You start recognizing who respects your no as much as your yes, doesn't punish you with silence when you defy their expectations, doesn't treat your kindness as an emotional ATM. You begin to see clearly which relationships are built on authenticity and which are built on roles and performance. And yes, that realization can hurt, but it's necessary. How do you recognize real relationships after transformation? Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. When you awaken, you stop living by fate and start choosing. And the first thing you must choose again is who is allowed into your new energetic field. A real relationship is one where you can disagree without being blamed. You can ask for solitude without being labeled cold. You don't need to earn someone's love with action. An outdated relationship is one where you constantly overcompensate because someone thinks you're not enough. Love is tangled with duty and fear. Silence is weaponized whenever you don't comply. A post-awakening empath must learn a new skill, choosing the right community. If you're in the phase of realizing certain relationships no longer align, if you're hurting because people you once felt close to are drifting away, leave a comment. I'm learning to choose who walks this journey with me. Because this is not just a psychological process, it is an act of sacred self-respect. And you are not alone. Those who truly resonate with your energy will find you. They don't need you to be anything to earn their love. They love you simply because you are you. The empath's journey doesn't end with recovery. It opens a new chapter where you no longer live just to protect yourself, but begin radiating the inner light you forged. In the next part, we'll explore how can an empath live as a creative force without defense or martyrdom, but with inspiration? What role do empaths play in healing toxic systems from workplaces to family? How does someone who once lived in silence become a guide without needing to shout? Jung wrote, a man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them. You, the empath, have walked through the fire. Now it's time to walk through the door into a new life, one of light boundaries and deep love. Carl Jung once wrote, the world will ask you who you are, and if you do not know, the world will tell you. You, the empath, once lived according to others' answers. You believed love meant never being inconvenient, never saying no, never choosing yourself. But through every chapter we've walked together, from inner collapse, shadow confrontation, integration, return to rebuilding your relational ecosystem, now you hold something no one can take away. You know who you are, no longer confusing love with obligation, no longer dissolving yourself to survive, no longer living to be needed, but living to express your most authentic soul. The awakened empath is not a survivor, but a guide. Jung never defined people by their trauma. He always saw the potential to transform the unconscious into consciousness, to transmute wounds into wisdom. And the empath once returned is not merely someone who heals themselves. They hold the map of compassion, awakening, and emotional intelligence. In a world fragmented by speed competition and the illusion of connection, it is the empath who brings the world back to the heart. Not through speeches, not through control, but through quiet, grounded presence, with firm boundaries and silent healing energy. A new social role, no more hiding, no more straining. You may have once thought this world isn't made for the sensitive, but perhaps the world is longing for that very kind of refined sensitivity. Not weakness, but softness. Not endurance, but discernment. Not passivity, but presence. You don't need to shout. You only need to stand firm in your truth, and the light you carry will touch the souls who have been waiting to see themselves in you. If this video resonates with your journey, leave a heartfelt comment. Below you, in becoming who I truly am, and I'm no longer afraid of it. Sometimes a single honest sentence is enough for someone to realize they're not alone. And we, the awakened empaths, no longer have to walk alone. One last word, and a small wish for you. Jung once dreamed of this image. He was walking through a dark forest, and in the middle sat a person, not afraid of the darkness, but conversing with it. He said, I am that person. You are also that person. The one who has walked through the forest of emotions. The one who no longer rejects the shadow, but understands where there is shadow, there is also light. If this video touched something within you, if you want to keep walking this path of awakening, healing, and soul-led creation, click subscribe, not for the numbers, but so we don't lose each other in a world filled with noise.